friends, welcome back to the next session on Service Operations Management. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be understanding and dealing with the concept of case study on listening to consumers, the learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand how or what case study we have identified on listening to customers and describing a case study on listening to customers with an example of a certain company. Now let's understand what is the case all about. So this particular case study will be focusing on the overview or introduction of this particular case and how this particular case study as a part of an organization is been applicable for listening to consumers. Now first understand what are the various benefits of listening to consumers. The various benefits as you can see in this particular slide are the major three benefits can be arised or can be obtained for of listening to the consumers. Number one, improves the customer retention, increases customer spending, and creates the brand ambassadors. So the benefits of listening to the consumers can be identified as it improves the customer retention. So when we continuously listen to the consumers, when we pay a proper patience and attention and proper attentive patiently listening to the consumers, we can create or we can retain the customers in the business organization. When we listen to the customers, we can easily identify what they are saying, what are their actual problems, and how they are feeling about our product. Whether the feedbacks or the feelings of the particular product or a service may be either positive or maybe either negative. So when the customer is very pleasant, very happy, and telling or quoting about a certain product, then we can say that he's quite happy and satisfied. But when the customer is very aggressive, dissatisfied, and annoyed with the service, then accordingly, his facial expressions will always deal and will try to say us that he is not satisfied with the product or service that he's been receiving. So in this way, on the basis of benefits, on the basis of listening to the consumers, we can identify very easily that whether the customer is happy, that is satisfied, or whether he is unhappy, that is dissatisfied. So whether we are listening to the customers or whether we are not listening to the customers, and then he can come to a certain conclusion as to what benefits can be arrived in the short run as well as in the long run. The improves of the customer retention also focuses on till what level of duration the customer will be retained in the business organization. That is, he's purchasing a certain product or a certain commodity for what level and for what duration he's been there associated with the business organization. The second perspective or the benefits of listening to the consumers is increase the customer spending. So accordingly, when we listen to the customers, we can increase the spending on the customers on the basis of inputs, feedbacks, and suggestions that they are providing. So the customer spending also increases simultaneously because we get a continuous inputs from the customers. And when certain inputs have been received, we try to modify, we try to bring in changes in the business organizations, either in the product, either into strategy, either into the service, either into the commodity, and so on. And hence, the customer spending on those particular considerations also increases simultaneously if we effectively listen to our customers. The next consideration or the third benefit is creating the brand ambassadors. So when we are listening to the customers, they always automatically have a certain attention that their voice is always been counted, it has been measured, and it is having a certain weightage. And hence, with the concepts of word of mouth or certain publicity, they are always itself act as a brand ambassadors to our product, and accordingly, they communicate the value addition to our product and the part of a qualitative service to one people to another people. And hence, they are always created as a part of a brand ambassadors to our business organizations. Now let's understand what is the case all about. So this particular case study about listening to the consumers is been undertaken with respect to a construction company, which is known as Beta. And they want to test its hypothesis with respect to about the value for a new solution for customers. So the Beta is a particular software or a particular solution that they have designed, that they have developed, and the construction company wants to identify that what value is being delivered to the customers. So the solution that has been designed or that has been developed is acting as a part of a value addition to certain consumers, and the company that is a construction manufacturing company wants to identify that a certain value is being created or not. Ducker Frontier conducted a voice of the customer study to advance the commercialization of the new product to meet the value expectations of the decision makers and compete with the current competitive offering. So Ducker Frontier, a particular manager who has been there in the business organization, he has conducted a survey or an analysis of voice of the customer. And on this particular basis, he has come to a conclusion as to the commercialization of a certain activity, about how the value expectation of the consumers can be identified, and on what basis the analysis of those goods, services, and commodities can be undertaken. And on those particular basis, Ducker Frontier came to a conclusion as to analyze about what can be the market situation, in what way the business organizations can be implemented, and the decision making in the short run as well as in the long run can be helpful to the organization for creating a better value addition to the customers' problems, viewpoints that we are listening to them. Now let's understand what the various problems associated with this particular case. Beta, a building and construction material company, it manufactures the various products which have been related with respect to the product for a wall and ceilings. And hence, the company has identified an opportunity to fill in a gap in product coverage for specialized product and began developing a new solution. And hence, this particular company was dealing in providing the two products that is which has been related with the walls and ceilings. And their category or industry was into construction or building material supply company. And hence, they have come with a certain solution. But the beta, as a part of a manufacturing company, needed to validate its hypothesis that the concept was addressed functionality, aesthetics, and price most effectively. So they were not sure about what strategy that needs to be accepted, whether the strategy would work or would not work, and how those particular strategies can be implemented in the business organization. And hence, a proper or correct channel was being essentially required to identify as to how to conduct a particular survey and in what way those particular surveys can be beneficial or helpful to the organization in the long run. Now, let's understand what is the Ducker Frontiers approach. So, on the basis of Ducker's Frontier approach, it was been identified as a two-phased approach. That is, in the first, the particular activity that we need to implement in a business organization should be always divided into two phases. The first phase focusing on one aspect or one scenario, and the second phase focusing on second aspect or the second scenario. So, an extensive experience in the customer intelligence and the contracts was being taken from the market to understand what is the market situation, what are the expectations of the customers, and how do we need to deliver a quality and a qualitative service to the customers. So on those particular basis, the product installation and acceptance for the beta's proposed new solution was being identified. And accordingly, the Ducker Frontier approach focused on two factors, either the supplier, distributors, or the dealers, or the second perspective is the customers. So ultimately, any one approach can be applied, and which approach is beneficial, that particular testing of hypothesis was being undertaken. Now let us understand what are the various considerations for the benefits of listening to the customers. So when we say that the voice of the customers is being raised, what are the various considerations that one needs to understand, from which sources or consideration the voice of customers can be listened. Number one, that is first is the focus groups and interviews. So we can listen to the various customers from the various focus groups or a particular specialized groups from which we can collect the information about what they are feeling about our product. So we can approach the different people, and accordingly we can understand or we can analyze or listen to what focus or discussion is being undertaken between them people, and accordingly what are their opinions about our products, about our services, and what do they feel about the company or the organization. And hence focus groups and the surveys and the interviews can be undertaken of those different peoples. The second consideration or the second voice of customer is the surveys. So on the basis of various surveys, we can collect the information directly one-on-one from the customers, from the people, from the consumers, and accordingly, the information can be collected on a paper pencil basis. The survey that has been undertaken is an ultimately source of an primary data, which is the first-hand information that has been collected from the consumers, and we can have a proper correct understanding about what does the customer actually feel. We can ultimately observe the people, we can observe the customers, and we can get the first-hand information about whether the data that we are receiving is correct, true, genuine, or not. And hence, survey is an authenticated source of information of consideration of collecting the source of information or the voice of customers. The third perspective or the consideration is the email, chat, and the calls data. So we can drop an email to the customers, and accordingly we can get the responses collected through the emails. This particular type of collection of data information may be relevant or may not be relevant, because a customer may ultimately see to your email, he may go through it, he may read it, but he may not respond to the email or a particular survey that has been attached. And hence, it may be attended or it may not be attended. And hence, email is a type of unreliable or non-reliable data, wherein at certain few stages, the information can be collected will be genuine, but at certain stages, it may go neglected on the basis of various chatbots. So we can organize the various chatbots on which basis the various information can be collected from the various platforms, various websites, and accordingly, based on the information that the customer is needing, the problems that he is facing, we can collect the data from the customers. And lastly, the third is the call data. So on the basis of various call data, we can give a random call to the customers and a various question answer series can be raised, and accordingly the customer may be asked to collect or submit a certain data or information and answer the few questions. So the call data focuses on collecting the data one-on-one from the customers. But in case it also has a drawback as a part of an email that if a customer is busy, if he's engaged, and if he's non-attentive to a certain calls, then accordingly the data cannot be collected on the basis of call data. The next perspective is NPS, that is on the basis of profitability and satisfaction survey of a particular customer. So on the basis of his particular satisfaction survey, whether he feels highly satisfied, satisfied, not satisfied, dissatisfied, and so on. So what is the level of satisfaction? What is the level of understanding of a certain product? And what expression does this shows towards a certain product? So expression-based survey can be undertaken, and accordingly, the data can be collected from the consideration or the data can be collected from the consumers. The next consideration is the customer reviews. So accordingly, the various customer reviews can be undertaken on the basis of certain time duration of data that data or a particular product or a service that you have availed. So customer reviews can be taken either 6 monthly or the yearly, quarterly, or on a certain frequent time of period of interval. So customer reviews are a part of interviews wherein you can ask the customer to rate a particular product or a particular service on the basis of star marks, and accordingly, they may rate it as 3.5, 4, 4.2, 4.3, 4.5, or 5 out of 5. So accordingly, various star marks can be provided for them, and the customer can select a certain star marks for a particular product or a particular service. The next consideration for the voice of customers is blogs and forums. So accordingly, on the various blogs, on the various forums, the data can be collected from them, and accordingly, the customers can be asked to place their voice and speak something about the product, about its feasibility, about its usage, about its features, and so on. And lastly, social media listening. So on the basis of various social media platforms, that is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so on, the customer can keep upgrading their data. They can publish the various information and we can collect the data from those particular sources. So accordingly, the voice of the customer can be known from the various social media platforms also. Now let's understand what is the case sampling that was being undertaken by the Beta company, that is the construction manufacturing company. So under the phase 1, which involved conducting the product trials and exploratory research. So they have conducted the various product trials, and accordingly, the first step that they have adopted is conducting the research on the basis of exploratory data. So on the basis of exploratory data, we try to extract or we try to identify how many or maximum number of data can be collected from different sources or from different participants and the respondents. So the company ran into the product installation and time trials, and accordingly, Beta's new product strategy was being used, and accordingly, the competitor data and the current company's data was being collected and it was being analyzed. So after the trials, the in-depth analysis was being conducted by the company, and one-on-one interviews to understand the customers would also be undertaken. So in the first phase, the company has approached the individual customers, and accordingly, one-on-one data was being collected from various customers and the various analysis of those particular data as to the current purchase decision, installation preferences, the software that is being provided, and what is the feasibility of that particular software was being undertaken in terms of case sampling. The second phase involved the concept of using the data, which is always of a quantitative nature. So accordingly, quantitative interview was being undertaken, and accordingly, they met the various stakeholders, and the various stakeholders are approximately 170 architects, contractors, distributors were being contacted, and the data was being collected to identify what is the hypothetical situation about the answers to a certain questions. So accordingly, the quantitative data was being collected and the information was being collected from various stakeholders, and the purchasing drivers, pricing, policies, channel, distribution, strategy, and so on. On these particular data, on the basis of hypothetical questions, the data was being collected from those peoples. Simultaneously, they have conducted the various internal interviews with the Beta's management to help identify about what is the product branding, what is the new product strategy that one needs to adopt, and how the channel strategy can be adopted in a business organization or the particular situation. The first case or the first phase was focusing on the collection of data one-on-one from the customers or the consumers. And the second phase was focusing on collecting the data from the various stakeholders, that is 170 stakeholders, which are architects, contractors, distributors, and so on. Now let us understand what are the various factors that needs to be considered while considering the voice of customers or listening to the customers. So effective listening to the voice of customers involves following factors. Number one, being a concern. Always we have to show to the customer or to the consumer that they are always concerned, and accordingly their inputs, suggestions are always valuable to the organization. And hence showing concern situation or scenario is essentially important to the customers or to the consumers. Installing effective feedback tools. So wherever it has been required, we must effectively install the various feedback tools wherein if the customer feels that they want to provide a quick, justifiable and needy feedback, then accordingly, the platform should be available for the customers or the people to provide the feedback. Understanding what the customers and their complaints. So accordingly, whatever complaints that have been arising to our customers, we must always have a certain platform, and those particular platform must be accessible to the customers. This particular platform should be always of a certain consideration, wherein we must try to identify that what the customer complaints are and how do we need to approach towards that particular complaint. The next perspective is empowering the customer concerned employees. So accordingly, a specific employees should be deputed in order to identify that they identify those particular customers, their problem is been assessed, it has been identified, and they address the customer's complaint in a very effective way. So customer-centric employees should be deputed in the business organization, and accordingly, those particular employees should be deputed to see about how do we solve the problems of the peoples or the individuals at the greater extent. The next perspective or the factor that needs to be considered is overall monitoring of the customer's behavior. So monitoring of the customer's behavior is essentially important in order to identify about how do we identify the behavior, on what basis or platform it does changes, and in what level it is being created in a business concern or a situation. And lastly, getting involved personally. So the involvement of the person, of the people, of the management is essentially important. And accordingly, we need to identify how the involvement of the top level management, middle level management, or the employees or the customers is been there of an active participation at all levels. So the conclusion. So at the conclusion of this particular case study, Gamma had a detailed understanding of the competitor's advantage, and on the basis of Ducker's frontier approach, provided a comprehensive overview of how the competitor's go-to-market strategy can be applied, which has given a multifaceted sales and marketing process, and it has always identified that our organization structure of sales and marketing group includes the hierarchy of sales and marketing processes. So when we say that a particular strategy needs to be implemented in the business organization, may it be a physical way, that is phase 1 or phase 2, trial 1 period or trial 2 period, wherever we are applying, that is in the phase 1, if we are applying for the people or the customers of the business organization, we need to collect the data one-on-one from the customers, and that is for the phase 1. And in the phase 2, when the data was being collected from the various architects, designs, manufacturers, suppliers, wholesaler, distributors, and retailers, we must try to provide a proper and effective sales and marketing tools and techniques, wherein the communication, coordination, and enhancement of activities needs to be undertaken in a very better way. And accordingly, all those activities should be a value addition to the business organization. And lastly, Gamma also received a recommendations to improve its own sales and marketing effectiveness, based on which the SWOT analysis, that is strength and weaknesses, can be relative to the competitor. So on the basis of competitor analysis, on the basis of self SWOT analysis, we must try to conclude about how those analysis can be undertaken in a very better way, and it can provide the benefits to the organization in comparison to the competitors. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what do we mean by a case study about the forecasting and aggregate planning in respect of service operations management. And lastly, we have understood a particular case study on forecasting and aggregate planning with respect to the concept of listening to the customers. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning in this particular session. We'll stay connected and we'll continue with our learning. Thank you for your patience listening of this particular module. Thank you.